Before we get started in the class, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good morning, beautiful people. We are, excuse me. Sorry, I did not sleep well last night. And again, somehow I'm losing my voice. So I did not get to do my meditation on these exercises. So I don't know how long it will take to discuss. So I'm going to attempt to do 2 exercises. I'm going to try to stick to my notes since I didn't have really much time to re-meditate on these this morning. So anyway, we are on the last foundation, which is the foundation of mindfulness of mind objects, or objects of mind, of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, satipatthanas. So we'll attempt to go over exercises 17 and 18 today, which are the same verse actually. So I'm going to recite the exercise itself, but both exercises of 17 or 18 come from the same verse in the sutra, but it is separated into observing internal formations and transforming those internal formations. So I'll recite the exercise that's listed in the sutra, in the discourse. And the Buddha says that he is aware of the eyes and ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and aware of the form, and sound, smell, taste, touch, object of mind, and he is aware of the internal formations, which are produced in dependence on these 2 things. He is aware of the birth of a new internal formation, and is aware of the abandoning of an already produced internal formation. And he is aware when an already abandoned internal formation will not arise again. I'll read that again without the extra ears, nose, and tongue. He is aware of the eyes and aware of the form, and he is aware of the internal formations which are produced in dependence on these 2 things. He is aware of the birth of a new internal formation and is aware of the abandoning of an already produced internal formation. And he is aware when an already abandoned internal formation will not arise again. Essentially stating that you are aware when a new internal formation has arisen, you're aware when that internal formation has disappeared or gone, and you are aware that when an internal formation has already been abandoned, that it will no longer arise again, meaning that you've eradicated that internal formation. I'm drinking some hot water. That's such an Asian thing. Yeah, right? You know that? Drinking hot water. I guess technically I'm half Asian, from the continent of Asia. Anyway, so exercise 17. So in this section of the sutra, to the end of the sutra, refers to the observation, as we discussed in the last class, of the 6 sense organs and the 6 sense objects, right? And we will come across in this section the term of internal formations, which in Sanskrit we refer to as samyojana, right? Which for the most part means like knots or fetters. I'm going to stick with the word knots because it'll make more sense for the meditation. But within these knots, right, they're classified in two kinds of internal formations. The first kind is the 5 dull knots, which is confusion, desire, anger, pride, and doubt. And the 5 sharp knots, which is view of the body as self, extreme views, wrong views, perverted views, and superstitious views. The latter are much easier to correct, right? So when the eye sees form, the ears hear sound, the nose smells a scent, the tongue tastes something, the body touches something, or the mind cognizes an object, right? Knots may or may not be tied, depending on the way in which our mind receives them, right? Receives those impressions of the senses. And the Buddha gives us this quote that whatever suffering arises has a reaction as its cause. If all reactions cease to be, then there are no more suffering, and there is no more suffering, right? So when someone speaks unkindly to us, for instance, right, if we understand the reason and we don't take the words to heart, right, and then we won't feel at all irritated by those unkind words, and the knots won't be formed in our mind. But if we don't understand the reason and we feel irritated and we feel aggravated and we feel insulted or whatever it may be, then a knot will naturally, of course, form, right? So but the substance of this knot will be hatred if we allow it to influence us, right? So when we misunderstand someone's words or behaviors, then the knot that forms is confusion, which often gives rise to irritation, pride, even attachment to those things, and even doubt within our own self. The knot of confusion, a lack of clear seeing, is what? Lack of clear seeing is what? What do we call that? Ignorance, vidya, right? And that's the basis for every other knot. It's ignorance. Ignorance is also the basis of every other link in the 12 links of dependent origination, right? So the feelings associated with these internal formations that arise are usually unpleasant, right? But sometimes internal formations are associated with pleasant feelings. And so when we're attached to a form, for instance, or a sound, a taste, or a scent, or touch, or object of mind, an internal formation of that nature of desire is formed, right? But because we're attached to it, we're also bound to it at the same time. And when the demands of that attachment are not met, right, then the feelings become unpleasant, right? So if something does bring you pleasure, you're like, ooh, I want more of this, but you can't get more of this, then that pleasant feeling becomes unpleasant. So anything from alcohol, drugs, right, beautiful forms, good food, good music, even words of praise, all this can produce a knot in us, right? An internal formation that begins as a pleasant feeling, but will most likely turn out to be unpleasant if we're unmindful. But once these knots are formed, are created, then we're kind of tied tightly to it. We're bound to it, and we're forced to seek out those objects of sense again and again in order to repeat that same pleasant feeling. Right? And we've kind of I made a little star on here last weekend because these notes are 5-6 years old. But I put a star here because we kind of spoke about this in our summer retreat. We talked about love, right? Falling in love. And I have a little note about it in here. But anyway, yeah, this was funny. But in falling in love, right, it's also an internal formation. Because in it, there's that material of blind attachment to it. Right? We kind of discussed not intensely, but we had a long discussion during our retreat. I think it was during the retreat, right? We talked about it. About the, not dangers, but about the, well, I guess danger is the correct word, about the dangers of misunderstanding what being in love is, right? But even the term to fall in love, right, in itself sounds a little bit chaotic, disastrous, right? Because why would you want to fall? Falling in itself is painful, right? And sometimes we'll refer to falling in love as love sickness, as if falling in love is some sort of disease, which, if it's the wrong type of love, is a disease, technically, right? Because it does more harm than good. But being in love in itself can be transformed, right? Being in love in the wrong way can be transformed. So that blind attachment that comes with it, that selflessness, or selfishness, sorry, and the domination or the act of kind of, or the feeling of possession, right, are replaced by the capacity to understand instead, right, to bring happiness to that person that we love, without demanding any specific conditions or expectations, right? So to transform being in love in this way is to transform an internal formation of attachment, of possession, of desire, of certain expectations or conditions. Because essentially, I think I brought this up during the retreats, I asked, why do you love your husband or wife? Oh, because they do this and that for me, right? If that means you're loving them according to these specific conditions, and if those conditions don't apply, then are you still in love with that husband or wife? If the only reason you love them is because they make you feel this way, or they do these things for you, is that really love? Or is that just like a boss-employee kind of expectation, right? Your boss expects you to meet specific metrics and goals and whatnot. Now your husband or wife is doing the same thing. How is that any different? But even feelings of sorrow and sadness in us are also internal formations, right? And these feelings arise from confusion, arises from desire, arises from hatred, from pride, from doubt. So if these roots of affliction are not transformed correctly and mindfully, then the feelings of sorrow will continue to remain in us. Because in our everyday life, the seeds of sorrow can be sown in our consciousness with or without the collaboration of others. Because we often think that this person brought me unhappiness, this person brought me agitation or anger, this person makes me feel loved, or whatever it may be, right? We're relying on external factors that make us think that this is happiness or sadness. But truthfully, we don't need those external factors to create internal formations, right? You don't need something or someone to have been done or said in order for internal formations to be created. So others may say or do things that produce these knots in us, but if we give birth or give rise to the seeds of understanding that we've hopefully conditioned within you, sown seeds within your consciousness of understanding, of tolerance, of love, of compassion, of generosity, giving, then whatever they say or do will have no effect, and they won't produce any internal formations within you, right? So it depends on the way that you receive what is happening to you. If you're stable, if you're relaxed, if you're understanding, if you have a mind of openness and love and compassion, and you're not caught up in any egotism of self, then whatever things people say or do will have no effect, right? They have no force, no power, no energy to produce any of those knots or internal formations within you. So if we live according to the teachings of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, then we can practice we can practice to be mindful. We can practice the mindful observation of what is arising and its duration and its destruction or transformation, right? because that is the process of everything that arises. It arises, it does something, and then it goes away. So if in our daily lives, if we practice that full awareness in order to be able to recognize those internal formations that arise, then we can find a way to transform it. We don't have to allow it to be anger. We don't have to allow it to be sadness. We don't have to allow it to be attachment. But if we do allow those internal formations to grow, right, and to grow strong within us, then the time will come when they will dominate our mind, will dominate the way we think, the way we act and react and live. And that work of transforming will be much more difficult, right? So an internal formation of hatred and desire or doubt needs our full attention as soon as possible. Especially the three poisons, ignorance, greed, and anger. If anything under those three poisons arises, need to be met, need to be welcomed into our mind, into our mindful observation as soon as possible. Right? Because when they arise for the first time, they're not still very loose, right? And we have time to untie it. But the law of knots that are 20 feet long, imagine how long it's going to take you to untie that, especially if they're all tightly woven. I think one of the examples that I'm sure we can all relate to is when we live with other people or another person, right? That we should try to help each other transform any internal formations that arise within us, that we have produced within each other. Because regardless of who you are, regardless of who you live with, you're going to create internal formations, good ones and bad ones. But if we practice understanding and practice loving speech and practice the four foundations, then we can help each other recognize those internal formations as they arise and not let them fester. Because at this point, happiness is no longer an individual matter. Because if I'm not happy, then you're not happy. If you're not happy, then I'm not happy. Right? So to transform that internal formation in the other is to bring about our own happiness. Even in one of the chants that we chant, right? The happiness of others is my own happiness. And that is true. Imagine living with someone that's just pissed off all the time. Right? Whether it's a significant other, whether it's a roommate, a child, a spouse, or a teenager. Right? So a person can create those internal formations, right, in their partner or in their significant other, and they can do the same for you. And if you continue to create those thoughts for each other, and then one day you'll have no happiness left, right? The knots are so dominating that there's just no room to see anything but those knots. So a person, or we need to recognize those knots quickly. Recognize new knots that are formed as quickly as possible. Otherwise, they're going to get tighter and tighter. So as we've seen in the kind of functionality of our mind and how things arise and transforms in our mind, that hopefully you'll see that the material of any of those internal formations that arise is ignorance or confusion. So if we can see ignorance that is present during the creation of the knot, then we can easily untie it. Because again, ignorance is what? Those internal formations as they arise, observing, recognizing, and acknowledging that a knot is being formed. Right? It is something that is possible. You can see it happening in real time. Often we don't. We see it after something has occurred. right? Because it's only afterward that after we've said or did something that we were like, you have feelings of regret or remorse or sadness or whatever it may be, right? It's typically afterward that we recognize a knot or internal formation has occurred. But at that point, the knot has already been knotted. But if you can see it, if you can see it weaving in real time as it's happening, right? Meaning that you're being observantly mindful of the situation that you're in, and you can see it as it's about to pull together and like, no, let's loosen that up a bit and see what the actual problem is. Because the problem isn't this person yell at me, right? It goes deeper than that, which gets us to the next exercise. But before we do that, I think it was in the exercises, I think it's like 12, 14, and 15, that we've seen that we can become aware of the interdependence of things, become aware of the multiple causations of things as they arise, right? We can see the roots and the nature of our minds and transform and transcend those unpleasant states that arise. So if we know that things are interdependent and permanent and are caused by multiple previous conditions, causes and conditions, then it should make it much easier for you to observe that this is more than what it seems to be on a superficial level, right? So mindful observation is to look and be able to see the nature of all phenomena, of all dharmas. So the transformation of those internal formations is the result of this insight. And now we get to the transforming of those internal formations, right? Exercise 18. Again, the exercise stated in the sutra is the exact same quote, or comes from the exact same verse of exercise 17. But in this exercise, or this breakage of the exercise, aims at putting us in touch with and transforming those internal formations that are buried and repressed in our consciousness, in ourselves. So the internal formations of desire, anger, fear, and regret have been suppressed in our subconsciousness for our entire lives, most of the time, right? But although they're suppressed, right, they're kind of dormant, but they're always trying to seek ways to manifest in our feelings, in our thoughts, in our actions, in our words. And it's easy for us to observe our internal formations when they appear as feelings on a superficial level, right, on the surface of our consciousness. But internal formations that are repressed and buried and dormant can't appear in a direct and natural way, right, in our conscious mind. Instead, they only disclose themselves indirectly. So we're not aware of their presence. Even though we're not aware of their presence, they continue to kind of tie us up and make us suffer in that kind of dormant state, right? Because then you have to ask yourself, then what is it that represses them? What is it that doesn't let them appear in the first place? If they're dormant and they're suppressed deep in our conscious mind, what is the reason that represses them? Ignorance is always the right answer. But in this case, it's our conscious reasoning mind. Because we know that our desires and anger are not wholly acceptable to society and to our own reasoning mind. So we found a way to kind of repress them. We found a way to push them into these remote, dormant areas of our consciousness in order to be able to forget about them. Right? It's the same thing we do with trauma. often play with trauma. We often push it into our subconscious, trying to forget about it, trying to forget that it never happens, right? But this kind of mental formation we call in Buddhism is mushita smrti, right? Which literally just means forgetfulness, right? In contemporary psychology, we can understand this as repression. Because we want to avoid suffering, then these are the defense mechanisms that we have to kind of push our psychological pains and our conflicts and our unacceptable desires into our consciousness so that we can feel peace with ourselves. Like, just push it away, right? Just hide everything underneath the table and everything's okay. But just hiding something doesn't mean it's gone. It's just out of sight until you accidentally go around the corner and you see it. Like, nope, I didn't see anything. You walk away. But our long-standing repressions are always looking for those ways to manifest in our words, in images that arise in our mind, or our behavior, and behavior unacceptable to society, and can later become symptoms of physical and psychological illnesses. So we may know that our words, thoughts, and behaviors are destructive, but we can't do anything about them because our internal formations are so strong, right? This means that in some of the things that you say, do, and think, and the things that you say, do, and the things that you think, say, and do that are unwholesome, right? You do them, and you have a kind of feeling in your gut that what you just thought, said, or did wasn't really a good thing. You did it anyway. You did it anyway because the internal formations that cause you to think, say, or do those things were so strong that they overpowered your conscious awareness of not wanting them in the first place. Right? Just think of a karmic bucket, right? If you have more good karma, it's going to outweigh any bad karma. But if your bad karma is heavier, then it's going to outweigh any good things you've done, you do or think or say. Likewise, our internal formations work in the same way. If you have more bad internal formations, then you're going to think, say, and do things that are terrible, whether you want them or mean them in the first place. They're just kind of reactions, or habitual reactions and responses to things. So, for example, let's say on one hand, we're all much older now in life, but imagine being 18, 19 again, right? Imagine being 18, 19 again. And as an 18, 19-year-old, most people want to go out and do things on their own, right? They want to be independent. They want to go and explore the world. They want to go be with their partner and live their life and do whatnot. And so you have this desire to want to go out and do your own thing and be independent on one hand. On the other hand, let's say one of your parents is very ill and sick, right? And they need someone to be with them, to take care of them. And so on one hand, you want to do something, be out on your own and be independent. On the other hand, your mother is extremely sick and needs someone to be there 24/7, right? And so there's a mental conflict here of wanting to do one thing, but feeling the need to do the other. This is what I mentioned earlier when these desires are not wholly acceptable by society, because society is going to expect you typically to be independent, right? That's expectations. But then that's not everyone's desires or expectations. But anyway, that's besides the point. And so then you choose, you're like, all right, well, you've made the decision that taking care of your mother, staying home, taking care of your mother is more important than going out in the world and being independent, right? And be on your own and being with someone you want to be with. So you do that, right? And your mother has some sort of relief, right? Like, okay, good, right? I feel good. The mother feels good that now you're staying with them and taking care of them. But deep down, they also know, deep down, it's also an internal formation from them because they know that you gave something up in order to take care of them, right? So now you have internal formations because you had two decisions, and now your mother has the same internal formations because she wants you there to take care of her and be with her, but she also wants you to do your own thing, right? But because there was this struggle, there's this back and forth with the decision of what to do, eventually you become unhappy, right? Eventually you may hold resentment. And so now you are unhappy in the house, and now your mother feels unhappy, right? Now you're doing things that you know are not positive or wholesome, right? You're yelling at each other, you're just, the relationship is getting worse and worse, right? And then your mother's doing the same thing because, again, we have to be able to, when you're living with someone, you have to be observant of the internal formations that arise. If they're feeling unhappy, then help them become happy, right? So these mental formations that arise, the mental formation that arises from you wanting to being parted or having these two struggles will become dangerous, and we start to create more knots and knots and knots because now you're blaming your mother being sick and you having to stay with her. You're blaming her for unhappiness. You're blaming her for not being able to go out in the world and do your own thing, right? Sometimes, for some parents, they even try to guilt trip you into staying or not doing something, right? My own parents guilt tripped me. My parents live on the other side of the world. And I had moved, I don't remember how long ago I moved here. What year are we in? 2025? Almost 20 years ago, I officially moved here. They were okay with moving here because I moved here for college. Oh my gosh, I just aged myself real bad there. But I moved here for college, and the expectation from them was for me to move back, get married, have kids, and continue on this legacy, right? Because I'm the only son, the oldest and only son, unfortunately. So there's an expectation of me to kind of continue on. And so after college, I struggled with, well, dang, what do I do now? Do I go back? Do I stay? Right? But I'd already made the decision, even before I moved here, that I was never going to go back. Anyway. And I haven't been back. I've only been back, I think, twice ever since I've lived here. But anyway, geez, I went way off topic. So according to the Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra, right, the method for curing that sorrow that comes with those internal formations that are repressed the method for curing the sorrow that comes with internal formations that are repressed is a deep observation of those internal formations. But in order to even observe them in the first place, right, we have to find ways to bring them into the realm of our conscious mind. And so the method in the Sutra of the Four Foundations is to practice conscious breathing in order to recognize our feelings, our thoughts, our words, our reactions, our actions, especially those that arise automatically as reactions, right, to what is happening. Because our reactions may have their roots in internal formations that are buried inside of us, right? Most of our reactions are because of subconscious things that are still in our minds, right? It's very rare that we have a reaction to something Well, the older you get, it's very rare to have a new reaction from something that you haven't experienced before. I don't know if that makes sense. But everything that you react to is because of some past things that are in the mind, right? That's how reactions work. So when we're aware that when we are aware of what we're feeling, thinking, and doing, then we can ask ourselves questions like, why do I feel uncomfortable when someone says that? Or why do I think of this person when I see another person? Or why do I say that to them? Or why did I say that to them? Why did I like this character or this movie or this song, right? Or who did I hate in the past who did I hate in the past that this person reminds me of? Think of a first impression of someone you've met before and you just like automatically didn't like them. And you just had like a weird feeling. Even if you can't think of one right now, you've done it. It's happened to you, right? But not liking them at that first impression isn't something new, right? It's because of they may be doing, saying, or looking like something that you didn't like, or experienced something negative in the past, or just had a weird reaction to, whatever it may be. But the point is, it's because of internal formations that were caused before, right? And so when you see something, it's basically like bringing up a memory, right? When you eat something, like, oh man, this reminds me of something I've had when I was a kid. When you smell something, I'm like, oh, that smells like grandma or something, right? It brings up memories, right? So it's in the same way. Nothing just comes of itself. So practices like this, when we're questioning ourselves, right, helps us discover those roots of our feelings, thoughts, and words and behaviors. And it gradually brings internal formations that are buried within us into that realm of conscious mind. So during our sitting meditation, because we've closed the doors to our sensory input, right, in order to stop that kind of listening, looking, and reasoning of internal formations that are buried within us, then they have the opportunity to reveal themselves in the form of feelings or kind of images in the mind that manifest and arise when we're in meditation. And it often begins as a kind of feeling of anxiety or fear almost, right? Or some sort of unpleasant feeling, right? Whose causes you can't really see right then and there. You just know that something's bubbling, that's uncomfortable. But we have to be able to shine that light of meditation or of mindfulness in order to see what's happening, right? To see these feelings. How are you going to be able to see the dark unless you turn on the light, a flashlight into it, right? So all these internal formations are kind of sitting in the dark. It needs a flashlight of our mindfulness to see what they are. And so when this feeling begins to show its face and it gathers strength, right, then it becomes more intense, and we may see or be able to see and feel its roots. When it shows its face and it starts to gather strength, right, we can see how those knots are formed. We can see the roots that created the knots, right? And then as those feelings arise initially, right, it may sense like it's like stealing our vitality away, right? It's robbing us of our peace, of our joy, of our sense of ease. Because you're supposed to be in meditation, right? Those are the feelings you're supposed to feel in meditation, is peace and ease and calmness. But now you have all these internal formations bubble up. You're like, what are we trying to do? Suppress them. It's the opposite of what we're trying to do, what you should be doing. And so when they do arise, right, we often don't want to be in contact with them. anymore. We may want to move our attention to a different object of meditation. We may want to even stop the meditation altogether, right? And use excuses like, oh, I'm sleepy, I'll meditate at a different time. It's excuses because you have internal formations that are arising that you don't want to deal with. In psychology, at least, in modern psychology, we call this resistance, right? We're resisting the discomfort that arises in meditation. Because meditation isn't all lollipops and golden roads and unicorns and happiness, right? That's maybe like 5 to 10% of meditation. Most of meditation is very difficult and very intensive and very uncomfortable. At least it starts out to be. Because then there are people who practice sitting meditation for hours a day, right? But they don't really dare to face or invite those feelings of pain into their consciousness, into their conscious mind, right? They're suppressing, they're repressing. Because it's like, I don't want to deal with this. Well, too bad. You're going to have to deal with it eventually, right? Better sooner than later. So instead they deceive themselves, right? You don't want to lie to yourself that these feelings are important, right? Because they give their attention to the subject of meditation. Sorry. I wrote that wrong. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading my own handwriting. Okay, whatever I wrote doesn't make sense. I'm going to try to rephrase what I wrote. Okay. If we're sitting in meditation, or if someone that sits in meditation for hours and doesn't observe the internal formations that arise, right, and instead tries to push them away and suppress them, right, you may have a thought that these aren't important. I better meditate on more important topics, right, like impermanence or selflessness, or some other object of meditation. This doesn't say that those subjects aren't important, right? They are, but they have to be meditated when they're at an appropriate time, when they're able to have a true influence on you, and not just because you're trying to avoid something else, right? This is often what happens in meditation, is when you're trying to use talking a lot. When you're meditating on one object in when you're meditating on an object in meditation, and the internal formations of discomfort arises, or a bad memory, or something that's causing you distress or anger or whatnot, a lot of times we try to shift our attention to something else that isn't that. Sometimes we do want to do that depending on the type of meditation you're doing, but the majority of the time when those types of feelings arises and needs to be dealt with and brought to attention immediately as it's arising, right, in real time. But we often don't do that because we're just trying to, that's a tomorrow's problem. Nothing's a tomorrow's problem. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. So if tomorrow's not guaranteed, that means you trying to eradicate that suffering is not guaranteed either. So instead, worry about it now, get rid of it now, then you don't have to worry about it tomorrow. Tomorrow can be a much more peaceful day. So in Buddhism, we don't practice this kind of mindfulness in order to repress our feelings, right? But instead, it's a way of looking after our feelings, kind of being a type of sponsor, right? To show affection, to show it affection in a non-violent way. And if we're able to maintain that mindfulness and we're not carried away by it or drowned in those feelings of conflicts within ourselves, then we can nourish and maintain our mindfulness practice through conscious breathing. Right? That is our main object of meditation, is conscious breathing. So we're able to nourish that mindfulness through that conscious breathing and try to become aware of our internal formations as the internal formations and conflicts as they arise, as they manifest in the here and now. I haven't used the term here and now in a long time. So without judgment, without blame, without criticism, right, for having these feelings or images that arise in the mind, we simply just want to observe, we want to identify and accept them in order to see their true source and their true nature. That is the only way we're going to be able to grab hold of an internal formation of a type of suffering and eradicate it, is to see it for what it truly is. Not by repressing it, not by shoving it in the back of our mind, not by saying this is tomorrow's problem, right? Right in the present moment needs to be acknowledged. So if there's pain, we feel pain. If there's sadness, we're sad. If there's anger, then we're angry. But that anger is accompanied by mindfulness. So we don't calm them down. We acknowledge that they're there and they have the potential to grow and take over our conscious mind. But if we're able to observe them as they arise, then we're able to be like, yo, it's okay, chill. It's not that big of a deal, right? We want to try to help it, acknowledge that it's a type of suffering, acknowledge that it's an internal formation, hold its hand, and go down the path of memory lane, so to speak, and figure out why that internal formation even occurred. How did you become a formation? From where did you form? Right? And the word itself, formation, is form. Form means that it's a form of something. Well, what is that something? Greet that pain, greet that sadness, and greet that anger, and mindfulness already causes those internal knots to loosen some of their strength, or lose some of their strength. So thanks to our mindful observation, right, eventually we'll see their roots and be able to transform them and get rid of them. Lessen one more, or shorten one more knot on our rope of suffering. So if we're able to know how to live every moment in an awakened way, then we'll be aware of what's happening in our feelings and perceptions in the present moment. And we won't let those internal formations become too tight in our consciousness. And so if we know how to observe our feelings, then we can find the causes of those long-standing internal formations and transform them without having to suffer through them. Dang, that was longer than I thought. At least I got through both. So I'm back on track of how I want this class. Because we have 2 more exercises left, 19 and 20. And that will end the discussion on all exercises before we do attempt to do a summary in September. There's 2 classes in September. I'll try to summarize in 2 classes the 4 foundations. But anyway. All right, I'm gonna stop talking. Questions, concerns, emotional outbursts. Yes, ma'am.
So, if you have a memory problem for the root cause of something, well, I hear that it can be emotionally driven, but can you kind of eradicate without remembering the root cause?
It's not a concern of remembering necessarily. It's not a case of remembering. It's more of why you feel a certain way of something. So if you don't like someone, for instance, right? The root cause doesn't mean trying to figure out or trying to remember who you don't like necessarily, but it's more about why don't you like whatever characteristics that that person has or did that you don't like. Does that make sense? So in a way, let's say, for Quang reminds me of someone I didn't like in high school, right? We're like 10 years apart, so that would never be a thing. But if I didn't like someone in high school and I grew up now, right, nearly 40, and I see someone that reminded me of someone I didn't like in high school, well, I don't have to remember who that person was necessarily. I just have to remember what my feelings were like, what I felt in the moment of those internal formations being created, right? It could be maybe because they said something, made fun of like my backpack or something, right? Or they don't come back to my witty sarcasm. I don't know, because whatever it may be, right? It doesn't have to necessarily do with the person, because you can't hate a person. Our hatred toward people isn't really toward this person. It's toward their ideas and their perceptions and their ideals and the way that they do things. But all that isn't the person, right? So if you take the person out of the equation and just look at the list of the things that you don't like or cause you suffering, that's what we need to know. Not the person, not the situation, not the location, not the time frame, but the things themselves that concocted those internal formations. Does that kind of make sense?
I understand that, but I think what I'm asking is a little different, so I'm not sure how that depends on no, I literally don't remember my childhood, so tracing things back is just not possible. So to know why there would be sadness, I wouldn't know. But to get rid of it, you have to remember that's the right question.
Now I get it. No.
The modern psychology, like that's what they try to do, kind of try to go to the root cause, like why, and basically I was coming to the same question: why did you like somebody who was in high school like him? Because there was a root cause, and because you don't remember, but there might be some root cause that bothered you or did something bad to you, and then you generalize that thought like everybody looks like this person is going to do something to me. But you forgot that like whole thing, background of it, what happened or why. But you just remember, this is just like what do you call run or fight. That's the human brain, which is kind of like always trying to do that. He said fight. Yeah, sorry, fight or flight. So it's just hating this person or this category. The same is true with everybody. Like something happened and you don't even remember that who was this person or what happened. But the brain has generalized that category and then he's always thinking. So sometimes the psychologists they try to go back why that's the why meditation. What happened and what happened. And sometimes you have to go back and see there was nothing. And then you figure out, okay, why? Yeah, that's what I'm getting all these persons, all. And there was one story somebody told me, that was one guy, like, he hated onions because, and for no reason, and then they kept asking why, because his father, he hated his father, and his father was just like, trying to feed him forcefully onions one day. So, I like it. So that's sometimes you have to go back and find out why. And that's why I want to go, like, why did you hate, if it is true or not, the person who looks like him, whoever looks like him, so, yeah.
There is a benefit to being able to remember, yes, right? Because it makes things a little bit easier. But at the core root of that, the feeling of sadness or anger is still sadness or anger at a fundamental level, right? And it doesn't matter how it occurred, it doesn't matter who caused it or how it was created. It's still there regardless, right? And if it wasn't one person that created it, someone else would have done it anyway, later on in life, right? And so it's not entirely necessary to be able to remember, but it's more important to acknowledge that it does exist, right? And if you can go back and trickle down the road and figure out some of the clues that may have caused it, that's great. But knowing it just makes things easier, but it doesn't mean it's impossible to get rid of it. Acknowledging that it exists in the first place is the biggest factor. Because again, we don't want to acknowledge that we suffer. We don't want to acknowledge that this person, I hate this person, or I don't like this person, or I like this, or I don't like that, right? We don't want to necessarily admit to that. So we just shove it down in our subconscious and hope for the best. It's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to be like, you know what? I do not like this person, or I do not like this thing, or this place, or this whatever. And you use that as the fuel to use in order to transform that unwholesomeness into something more wholesome, or at least eradicate whatever suffering is causing you. So no, essentially, it's not necessary to remember. It just makes things a little bit harder. Because instead of saying, well, why, instead of trying to go back and remember, right, for something that you can't remember, then instead use whatever you can remember now that you're using the same excuse for, right? It's a good example. Just say sadness of some sort, right? You have an idea that whatever core sadness that you feel happened in childhood, but you can't remember it, right? But try to go back as far back as you can for something that brought you that same type of feeling of sadness and use that instead. And then work your way forward, right? Sure, we want to go back as far as possible because it makes things easier to let go and to observe and to see and say, I caught you. This is why, right? Yeah, exactly. We pull the roots out, it makes things easy. But you can still kill a root without having to pull it out. Right? There's a plethora of ways we can kill roots without the need to pull out the root. Sorry, there's a plethora of way of killing the weeds without having to pull out the root. There we go.
But if you sat with the sadness and trying to examine it, nothing's happening. You just sit there examining it.
You can sit there for the rest of your life. It's not depressing. It sounds depressing, right? It sounds like it's what's the word? oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word when people think of, when we say Buddhism is all about suffering? Pessimistic. It sounds pessimistic, right? Because society makes it seem like this is pessimistic, right? You have an idea that sadness is bad and happiness is good, right? This is your own deluded mind thinking this way. And so if you think that, oh, it's depressing to try to figure out why I'm sad for the rest of my life, well, that's only depressing to you. But to someone that's trying to find freedom from it, that's a courageous journey. Because how many people can say, I'm going to intentionally feel the sadness in order to discover my way out of it? How many people would want to do that? Not very many. Correct. Right. It's about accepting what arises. It's about seeing its lifespan. It's seeing its destruction. That is the natural force of the entire universe, right? It's the initiation, the creation, what is it called? Sustainability, whatever. But it's born, it lives, and it dies, basically. Cycle of life. But sometimes we have to live with it a little bit longer than we would like. And that's okay. I've been meditating on a specific type of suffering for the past 11 years. 11 years, that's a long time for one specific type of suffering that's just holding me back. 11 years, it's a long time. Maybe I'm just stupid, right? Maybe I'm just intentionally suppressing it. I don't know. But it's still something that is, it's one feather away from freedom. But it's still right there. Luckily, it's farther down the list, but it's right there. But anyway, so it doesn't matter, right? It can take as long as it needs to be. But you don't want to be one of those people that suppresses and forgets about it, because you're not doing anything. We can't improve meditation unless you practice. You can't build muscle unless you work out. You can't get more intelligent unless you study. So you have to put the work into it. Sometimes we don't want to do the work. It's hard. Right? It's hard. I can acknowledge that 100%. But it is fruitful work.
I mean, how would you add something to support that? You started your first year, like anything you use for false pleasure will cause you suffering. And like you give example like drugs or all these comes together in the beginning and so on. So that means once you're looking for pleasure, easy things, but they are not fruitful. They're always not enough. But we start with harder things which are bitter, which are does not look like giving you pleasure immediately, but they are eventually going to be fruitful. Same thing applies to any eating habit or mindful meditation, which are not means if we think things are sad or something really bad, we shouldn't do that. We should stay away from this thing. We should find the root cause of the problem. That's not negative. But if we focus on the hardest part or the tough part and crack it down, then that will be fruitful. But simply eating habit, if we eat bitter foods or bitter melon or something, which are very, very healthy for you, but sweet and all those tasty, we get false pleasure, but eventually it becomes really bad. So any desire of something in short run, looks very, very exciting and it's not.
Is there anything exciting, really? For instance, yesterday, Quang asked me, when did I stop liking cheese? as I said, when I was a kid, I used to love cheese. I used to eat cheese out of the packet. And now cheese literally disgusts me. Like, I can't smell the smell of cheese. I can't smell it being the dominant flavor. Like, I can eat cheese like pizza, but that's as far as I'll go. So he asked me, when did you stop liking cheese? I'm like, I have no idea. Just one day I just magically woke up and didn't like cheese. So that would be an excellent form of why meditation. But at the same time, I know it's not conducive to my practice. I don't care when I stop liking cheese, right? It's not a suffering necessarily. It's more of a suffering for others because, like, oh, I have to take cheese off, we have to lessen cheese, or if someone's cooking from or whatever, they have to not use cheese or use less of it, or whatever it may be. So it's a suffering for others to try to adapt to what my needs are. It's not my suffering. So I honestly don't really care when I stop liking cheese. It's not a priority. If cheese brought me some sort of trauma, then I would say, okay, maybe I need to meditate on cheese. But I don't think I have any trauma from cheese. Just your taste buds change, right? Taste buds naturally do change. So it's just one of those things. So again, I don't have to remember when I stop liking cheese. But I can acknowledge I just don't like cheese, and I can use that as an object of meditation.
But generally, you get trauma. Means like you don't quit eating all of a sudden. Means something happens, triggers, and then you stop eating. I mean, it is my experience. It's just like it's always like you had some smoked cheese or something really stinky. Especially somebody brought it here, like this. I remember disgusting. There was several. I think one of the retreat maybe Cynthia brought it something. That was disgusting. Right? It was very old, but like I'll tell you my true story to trauma. When I was a kid, like 5 years old or something, and 5, 6 years or something. And I used to eat chicken. I think I was non-vegetarian back then. I asked my dad, I need chicken. And back then, they will take the backyards of them, they will take the real live chicken. And I'm just curious, I'm just standing right there and just chop the thing, and it's jumping up and down, like blood all over. Since that day, I was traumatized. I was traumatized really bad, like for weeks. I was hiding into the bed, and like people tried to find me, like I couldn't touch the meat. I don't even go to grocery stores. I was home, like I see the dead animal everywhere jumping up and down, and that's what is so much home. And it's like,
I 100% agree with you. I was right there with you too. I don't know if I said this in a class before, but I remember as a kid, I grew up in the Middle East, and during certain holidays, right, they would have a goat, sacrifice a goat, right? And so usually every family would have a goat and they'd sacrifice it for this holiday. And so I remember, I don't know how old I was, probably like 9 or 10. I was like, oh, there's a goat. I have a friend to play with in the yard, right? And all of a sudden the goat was gone one day. I'm like, where's, and I named it. I don't remember what I named it, but I named him something. And I was like, you're about to eat it. I'm like, what do you mean I'm about to eat it? 2 hours later, the head was on the centerpiece of our table. You know what I mean? So from then on, I've never ate lamb or goat ever since then.
you would have been traumatized more if you have seen chopping them like blood and all that. There was so many things.
Oh yeah, no.
For months. Everybody tried to eat chicken.
That's a very dramatic.
I was 5 years old.
It's a dramatic sense of trauma of not liking chicken. I remember in college, one of my college roommates, he was older, but he was in the military, and I guess he was stationed somewhere in Africa or something at one point. And for like 6 months straight, the villagers would feed them chicken. Every single day, meal after meal was always chicken. And so when he came back to the States, he hated chicken. I was like, I can't stand chicken anymore. So in the house, when me and the other roommates would cook, we would avoid chicken. None of us ate chicken in the house if he was going to be there to eat with us. And so we would always have to like sneak chicken in or like go out and have chicken. But I think that's a lesser form of kind of trauma when you're force-fed something, right? Or in your case, you weren't forced, but I guess you. Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, no kidding, right? Yeesh. Craziness. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry? A pet peeve is a formation, is an internal formation. So a pet peeve is caused by something that you just don't like, right? Like someone walking slow in front of you. It's a pet peeve. Well, why don't you like walking? Why don't you like walking slow? It's the question. It's not, why is this person walking slow? It's the wrong question to ask. It's why do you not like people walking slow? Right? I'm sorry, repeat your road rage question. I heard road rage. I'm like, ooh, I got some of that too. Ask yourself why. Why? There, and then you have to continue asking yourself why. Because it's not, them following the rules isn't the issue. Nobody really follows rules, to be honest, right? Your road rage isn't caused by others people's actions. They're just supporting your internal feelings of whatever they're doing, right? Because if they weren't breaking rules, right, your road rage still exists, but it's not being showcased when people are following the rules and they are going to speed limit and they are supposed to be doing what they're doing, right? Just because you're not feeling road rage doesn't mean you don't have road rage internally, right? And so when road rage does arise, ask yourself why. Following the rules isn't good enough. They're not following the rules. They're not going to the speed limit. That's not good enough. There's more to that. Why do you feel kind of superior to question them or judge the way that they drive? How is that influencing you? How is that doing anything to you that's causing you to suffer? Because if you think about it, the example I typically give for road rage is if you're driving on the road and someone cuts you off, right? If someone that has road rage, their reaction to that is, how dare you? They're cussing them off, they're flipping them off, they're calling them all sorts of names and doing this and doing that. But you have no idea why they cut you off. For all you know, there's someone in the back seat about to give birth. There could be someone bleeding out in the front seat, right? They could be going to some sort of emergency or something, but you have no idea, right? They could have a very valid reason as to why they cut you off and why they're breaking the rules. But because you don't know, right? Not knowing, ignorance, you're allowing what is happening to cause you suffering for something that's unknown. So them cutting you off isn't the suffering. Their action can never cause you to suffer or to be happy. It is always your reaction. It's always your own perception to things that causes you to be happy or to suffer. So now if something does cause you to suffer, you have to ask yourself why. I had road rage. Okay, why? Because people aren't following, because this person cut me off. Why? Why? You continue to meditate on that, to continue to contemplate on that, till you get to the very core reason. It may take some time, right? It's still taking me 11 years to figure out mine, right? Stephanie may never figure out hers. She can't go back that far. But that's the way out. That's the antidote to eradicating these sufferings. To figure out their root source. Otherwise, you're just suppressing. You're just letting it be. Road rage is terrible. I'm going to tell you about that. I have a slight road rage issue. Sometimes. I'm getting better. I'm letting it be. Any other questions, concerns? This was a good discussion. We will not have time for walking meditation, but we will at least do a short meditation to give you some time to contemplate on pet peeves, or how far back you can go, or how far back I can go. All right, so we'll do that. We'll do a quick meditation before we end class. please. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Welcome back. Hopefully that short meditation session did something, or at least brought up a good topic for meditation later. So I was meditating, I was thinking about our, excuse me, thinking about our upcoming classes for meditation. Since I'll use the 2 classes we have in September to cover, summarize the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And in October and November, we'll just have just meditation. So there won't be any discussion. It'll be a short introduction, at least in the beginning, for those that need introduction or instructions to meditate, but we will just use the classes in October, November, just to sit and meditate. Maybe depending on when the second class in October is, maybe the first class, we'll turn that into a half-day intensive meditation retreat. I don't think we have had those in a while, but it'll just be half day. So usually we do it from like 9 a.m. to about 4 p.m. With about 4 sessions, I think about 4 1-hour sessions of meditation. So when I say intense, I mean, I'm going to make you work. With probably 1 or 2 talks or discussions, but we will do that in October. I will be leaving toward the end of October for a month for a retreat. I will not be here, but Quang will be. And so he'll continue the meditation classes and the sutra study classes as well. Both will be up until end of November. And then in December, either the first Saturday or the second Saturday of actually probably the second Saturday of December, we'll have our winter retreat. So it'll be the full day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. I believe the first weekend of December, we'll have our Venerable Abbot's birthday celebration or continuation day celebration. That'll be the first Sunday of the month, I believe. And then the following weekend, we'll have the meditation retreat, and then we'll have our break up until the Lunar New Year, which I haven't looked up yet, so I don't know when it is next year, but all classes will come back after that. What else I'm going to bring up? We'll be celebrating our Ulambana celebration, so our Parents' Day, our Ancestors' Day celebration on September 7, 10 a.m. It's a Sunday. So we will have regular service that Sunday at 12:30. So in lieu of that, we'll have the Ulambana celebration. Again, that's September 7, 10 a.m. So that's our next biggest holiday, our second most important Buddhist holiday. I think that's everything for the rest of the year. Wow. Whole year has gone by. What a shame. It feels like it. When I count down, when I do the counting, I'm like, oh, we'll have 2 more classes, 3 more classes. It just makes it seem like it's right around the corner. which it really is. They're going to blink and it's 2035. Anyway.
Are we going to do another mindful working day for conscious? Because I think named Dawn, you were saying that you can do Sunday.
Great question. I don't have an answer for you. There should be eventually, because we did the top level, the bottom level we still need to do the same thing too, where the grass is. So that will happen eventually. But I think they're trying to finish one layer first, or one level first. They just need us to do all the hard work and get all the rocks and concrete out, which we did. So
the one strong person came last time, he was very helpful. So somebody might say, he actually did really good.
100% agree. Okay. That's all my announcements. If anybody has no other questions, we'll go ahead and transfer the merits and end today's class. Please join me in invoking Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings.